They thought burying you would end you. They forgot you were the seed. My dear chosen ones, let that line sit for a second. Because right now, the same people who whispered your name like a prayer when you were useful are now whispering it like a rumor. They said you changed, and they're right, but not in the way they think. You didn't just change, you upgraded dimensions. You walked off the old stage, burned the script, and rewrote the entire play with your own pen. That's what happens when a chosen one wakes up. The world built on your silence starts shaking. Every room that benefited from your self-doubt starts feeling an earthquake. And suddenly, your name is being passed around like a headline. They're different now. They act brand new. No, you're not brand new. You're brand real. When you start moving with clarity, confusion takes it personally. When you stop explaining yourself, the insecure call you arrogant. When you stop apologizing for existing, the manipulators call you cold. But here's the truth they choke on. You didn't betray anyone. You just stopped betraying yourself. That's what scares them. Because you were never meant to blend in. You were built to break patterns. You were designed to disrupt systems that run on your silence. And now that you've taken your power back, they're scrambling for a story that makes sense of your glow-up. They'll say, you've changed. Because admitting you evolved and I stayed the same would crack their illusion. They'll say, you're acting different because your peace exposes their chaos. They'll say, you think you're better because deep down they know you finally realized your worth. My chosen ones, never waste your breath defending your evolution to those still addicted to their version of you. Let them talk. Let them gather in corners that can't contain your name. Every whisper, every side-eye, every rumor, it's free marketing for your resilience. You don't have to clap back when your existence is already the loudest response. And I know what you might be thinking. Why do they care so much? Why can't they just be happy for me? Because comfort hates evidence of freedom. When someone who used to shrink suddenly stands tall, it makes others question the cages they've accepted as home. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped fitting in rooms that demanded your smallness as payment for belonging. You were trained to dim your light to avoid making others squint. Now they're shielding their eyes and calling you too bright. But that's not your problem. That's their adjustment period. Listen closely, chosen ones. Your transformation isn't an apology, it's a declaration. You don't owe anyone a step-by-step explanation of how you healed, what you released, or why your energy feels unfamiliar. Some people are addicted to the version of you that made them feel superior. They miss the version that laughed off disrespect, that smiled through discomfort, that softened truth to avoid tension. But that version of you was a peace treaty written in your own blood, and you've revoked it. Remember this, every time they say, you changed, what they really mean is, you stopped letting us use you as the emotional power source for our dysfunction. They call it distance, it's actually boundary. They call it attitude, it's actually clarity. They call it arrogance, it's actually self-respect. Don't explain your evolution, embody it. You are not here to be digestible. You are here to be undeniable. So here's your reminder, my chosen ones. You're not just walking in a new timeline, you're enforcing new rules. You don't owe your past self an apology for outgrowing what once felt like survival. You're not arrogant for protecting your peace. You're not cold for choosing solitude over chaos. You're not distant, you're finally aligned. Let them whisper, let them speculate. While they're dissecting your glow, you're busy writing your next chapter in ink they'll never be able to read. Because this isn't just a comeback, it's a complete system reboot. The era of shrinking is over. You're not the rumor, you're the revelation. Welcome, chosen ones, to your new authority. And before we dive in, my dear chosen ones, take a second to breathe this in. You didn't stumble here by accident. You were pulled here because your timeline just shifted. and you can feel it. The noise around you isn't random. It's resistance reacting to your new authority. If you're one of the few who can sense the world tilting under your feet right now, hit that like button so this message reaches the others waking up just like you. Subscribe if you know this version of you doesn't fit inside old definitions anymore. Drop in the comments if you're done defending your growth and ready to let your power speak for itself. Stick with me till the end, because what's coming next will sound like I've been reading your mind. And if you're truly a chosen one, every word will feel like confirmation that what you're experiencing isn't madness. It's mastery. Now, let's break it down step by step, because if they're talking about how you've changed, wait till they see what's really coming next. Number 1. You didn't change. You deleted the version of yourself built to keep everyone else comfortable. You didn't change. You just stopped apologizing for outgrowing their comfort zone. They wanted you soft, small, and silent, but the version of you they could control no longer exists. My dear chosen ones, this is where the story really starts to sting. Not for you, but for the ones who built their confidence on your compliance. They keep saying, "You changed," as if it's an accusation. But let's call it what it is: projection. You didn't change. You outgrew the costume they stitched together for you. You stopped performing in a play that never paid you peace. You stopped being the version of yourself that made others feel tall while you stayed kneeling. And now they're rattled because the script doesn't work anymore. The truth is that old you wasn't a person. It was a peace treaty. It was a survival mask sewn from fear, guilt, and the desperate need to avoid conflict. You smiled when they crossed lines. You laughed at jokes that made you shrink. You let people borrow your energy like it was an open tab, all to keep the atmosphere calm. And they loved that version of you, not because it was you, but because it was useful, predictable, manageable. But the moment you stopped apologizing for your clarity, the moment you said no without explaining, the energy shifted. Now they call you distant, defensive, different. Why? Because they can't feed off what you no longer offer. You didn't hurt anyone. You just stopped volunteering to be their emotional power supply. And that's when the panic starts. Some of them are still trying to test the boundaries, poking the new you to see if the old one will come out. You can feel it, can't you, chosen one? The subtle digs, the sarcastic comments, the "you've changed" statements laced with guilt. But this time, you don't flinch, you don't explain, you don't rush to make them comfortable again, because you've realized something radical. You were never supposed to be digestible to people who preferred your silence over your strength. And maybe right now, you're wondering, am I becoming too cold, too detached? No, you're just becoming accurate. You're no longer mistaking peace for people-pleasing. You're no longer lighting yourself on fire just to keep others warm. The warmth you carry now is for growth, not approval. You finally understand that your energy isn't a community resource. It's private property. They'll call it arrogance because they can't name it integrity. They'll call it distance because they can't recognize boundaries. But you know the truth. The real you didn't just arrive. It was waiting for you all along, buried under layers of apology and expectation. So let them whisper, let them misinterpret, let them hold committee meetings to discuss your glow-up. You don't owe them access to your evolution. You didn't change. You reclaimed the version of you that was never fake, just buried. My chosen ones, remember this. The loudest backlash always comes right after you stop begging for belonging. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not cruel. You're calibrated. And the version of you that once begged to be understood is finally too free to be explained. You didn't change. You just stopped asking for permission to exist loudly, and the world will adjust or it won't. Either way, you're done shrinking. Number 2. Your new era doesn't ask for permission. It moves like thunder through silence. Your new timeline doesn't wait for permission to be unapologetically bold. They call it rebellion when you stop asking for approval, but what you're really doing is remembering your power. My dear chosen ones, let's make something clear. This new timeline you've stepped into doesn't need validation stamps or approval signatures. You're not waiting in line anymore, hoping for someone to say you're allowed to take up space. You've already arrived, and that alone shakes people who still believe confidence must come with an apology. You're not playing small just to keep the peace. You're not bending to fit opinions that never paid your rent or healed your pain. You've stopped waiting for consensus because the truth is, visionaries never get permission slips. They just move. There was a time you asked, is this too much? Too loud? Too soon? You used to tone down your brilliance like it came with a volume knob, afraid that your confidence might sound like arrogance to the insecure. You used to edit your sentences, your style, your energy, not to be authentic, but to be accepted. And it worked for a while. But deep down, you knew you were suffocating under the weight of other people's comfort zones. That's over now. You're done dimming your light to make others feel safe in their shadows. In this new reality, bold isn't reckless. It's necessary. Radical doesn't mean aggressive. It means real. It means trusting your instincts when no one else understands the logic. It means walking away from familiar circles that keep spinning in the same direction while you're built to fly. It means making decisions that don't make sense to anyone until they see the results. And by then, it's too late to stop you. And let's be honest, chosen one, they'll say you're acting different, but what they really mean is you've stopped asking for their approval before moving. They'll call you radical, intense, or too much, because you no longer translate your truth into their language of fear. You used to crave reassurance. Now you crave alignment. You used to ask for opinions. Now you move off conviction. You're no longer accessible to people who only show up when you doubt yourself. Some will say, you've changed. But the truth is, you've returned. Returned to the raw version of yourself that existed before self-doubt was taught to you, before you were told to tone it down, before ambition became a dirty word. You're not performing rebellion. You're living honesty. You're not trying to impress. You're trying to breathe. So, my chosen ones, stop asking, is this okay? And start saying, this is mine. The world doesn't need you to shrink to make sense. It needs you to expand so it can evolve. Don't wait for a crowd to clap before you step forward. Half of them are just waiting to see if you'll second-guess yourself. Let them watch. Let them mislabel your clarity as chaos. Every time they call you too much, take it as confirmation that you've stopped living inside their limits. This timeline isn't about being liked. It's about being real. You're not waiting for permission anymore. You are the permission. You are the shift they didn't see coming. You are the evidence that silence doesn't equal peace, and that boldness doesn't need a round of applause to be justified. So walk like your decisions already make sense, because eventually they will. And by the time they understand you, you'll already be 10 steps into your next evolution. Number 3, they're not mad you changed. They're lost because you stopped playing the character they wrote for you. You didn't change. You just fired yourself from the role they wrote for you. They loved the version of you that kept their story neat, not the one who finally started living your own. My dear chosen ones, this one cuts deep because it's not about enemies. It's about people who swore they cared. The ones who said, you've changed, when really you just stopped acting. You were never truly seen. You were cast. Cast as the helper, the peacemaker, the reliable one who never missed a cue. They didn't want a person with a pulse. They wanted a character with predictable lines. As long as you stuck to the script, they were comfortable. You stayed soft when they were sharp, calm when they were chaotic, forgiving when they were careless. You carried the emotional weight of their story while yours sat gathering dust. But one day, something in you snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. You looked around and realized this wasn't your movie. You were the side character in someone else's narrative, performing for applause that never came. So you did the unthinkable. You walked off the stage mid-scene. And now the audience is in chaos. They're whispering, "What happened to you?" What happened is simple. You stopped confusing approval for connection. You stopped editing yourself to fit their storyline. You stopped apologizing for wanting to be the main character in your own life. They don't understand that your quiet withdrawal wasn't betrayal. It was a boundary. You're not being dramatic. You're being real. And realness feels like rebellion to people addicted to performance. They don't miss you, chosen one. They miss the version of you that made their dysfunction feel functional. The one who absorbed their guilt, softened their outbursts, and translated their chaos into calm. They miss the one who flinched at their silence and folded under their disapproval. They miss the character, not the creator. Now they're scrambling to rewrite the story without you. They're spinning narratives. You're selfish, you've changed, you're cold, because the truth is too heavy. Their story doesn't work without your compliance. You were the emotional glue, the steady background music that made their chaos sound poetic. Without you playing the role, their script falls flat. But here's the thing, my chosen ones, you were never meant to be the supporting act in someone else's illusion. You are the author, the director, the lead. And yes, walking away from the stage they built for you means you'll be misunderstood, maybe even villainized, but you'll also be free. Because pretending is exhausting and authenticity doesn't apologize for breaking continuity in someone else's story. So when they say you've changed, smile. They're just mad that the show got cancelled. The ratings dropped because you stopped performing pain for their entertainment. They call it distance. It's actually self-respect. They call it ego. It's actually emotional recovery. You didn't change, chosen one. You reclaimed the pen. You realized the story was never about keeping them comfortable. It was about setting yourself free. Let them rewrite history. You're writing legacy, and this time it's unscripted. Number 4. You took your power back the moment you stopped signing unspoken contracts with your own exhaustion. You took back the power they were borrowing. The moment you stopped saying yes to what insulted your peace, the whole game changed, because control only works with your consent. My dear chosen ones, let's be honest, power isn't something you shout for, it's something you stop giving away. You didn't gain authority by force, you gained it by subtraction, by cutting off the energy supply to every system, every person, every dynamic that ran on your silence. For years, people mistook your kindness for permission. They mistook your patience for compliance. They built entire routines around your predictability, knowing you'd show up, smooth things over, apologize first, fix what they broke. And you did. Until one day, you didn't. That's the moment everything started shaking. The moment you quietly withdrew your consent from every unspoken agreement that cost you peace. The old structure began to crumble. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to prove a thing. All you had to do was stop co-signing lies that painted your exhaustion as loyalty. You stopped pouring into relationships that only existed because guilt kept you there. You stopped pretending that being needed was the same as being respected. And that single act, that quiet no, was more revolutionary than any speech you could have made. See, chosen ones, when you finally get tired of performing the role everyone benefits from, the room gets cold. The invitations slow down, the energy shifts. People don't know how to behave when you're no longer volunteering to be their emotional generator. And they'll say you changed, but what really happened is you stopped financing your own manipulation. You stopped lending your power to people who charge their egos on your self-doubt. You realize that not everything nice is healthy, and not every connection is worth keeping plugged in. They'll swear you've become distant, detached, maybe even selfish. But the truth is, you just started practicing emotional economics. No more overspending your energy on people who can't afford reciprocity. You stopped giving discounts on your presence. You stopped explaining boundaries like you owe a syllabus for your self-respect. You didn't become intimidating. They just can't afford the new cost of access. And maybe you've noticed, chosen one, when you walk into a room now, the atmosphere shifts before you speak. That's not arrogance. That's clarity. People can feel when someone no longer needs external validation to breathe. They can sense when the leash of approval has snapped. You're not loud about your evolution because you don't have to be. Your peace does the talking. What's funny is, they think you cut them off when all you did was stop carrying what wasn't yours. The truth is, they were living off your emotional electricity, mistaking your generosity for endless supply. But the power plant shut down and the lights went out, and now they're realizing you were the source all along. So when they say you've changed, smile. Because what they're really saying is, I can't use you anymore. That's not cruelty. That's correction. You didn't just grow, you rewired the entire circuit. You didn't just move on, you reset the power grid. And in this new timeline, chosen ones, your silence is no longer submission, it's strategy. You don't chase crowns, you don't beg for validation. You walk with authority because you finally remembered where the switch is, and you turned it back on for you. Number 5, they can't predict you anymore. You stopped translating your truth into a language they could control. They can't handle you now because you don't fit their manual anymore. They studied your old moves like a playbook. Now you've rewritten the game in a language they'll never decode. My dear chosen ones, this is the part where confusion becomes their full-time job. Because you used to be predictable, they could trigger you, guilt-trip you, or silence you with one well-placed sigh. They thought they knew your patterns, your limits, your breaking points. You were safe to them because you were manageable. You'd shrink the second tension entered the room. You'd soften your truth to protect fragile egos. You'd apologize for things that weren't even your fault, just to keep the peace that only benefited everyone but you. But those days are over. You no longer move from fear, you move from alignment. You're no longer reacting, you're responding. You've stopped flinching at chaos and started building peace that doesn't need permission to exist. And that, my chosen ones, has them terrified. Because when they can't predict you, they can't control you. When they can't read you, they can't rewrite you. You've become unreadable to people who once treated you like a manual they could flip open whenever they wanted to push a button. Now, they're scrambling for access codes that don't work anymore. The guilt trip expired. The manipulation bounced. The silent treatment returned to sender. You've exited the emotional jurisdiction where they held authority, and they feel it. That's why you sense their tension, their subtle resentment, their sudden distance. It's not hate, it's confusion. They're staring at the same face, but the energy no longer bows. The tone no longer bends. The heart no longer bleeds just to be accepted. You might even feel them testing the new you, trying to poke holes in your peace. You've changed, they'll say, waiting for you to explain yourself. But you won't. You've learned that explaining to the wrong audience is just another form of self-betrayal. You've learned that boundaries don't need permission slips, and silence doesn't need to be justified. You've learned that self-respect is not rebellion, it's reprogramming. And maybe right now you're wondering, why does it bother them so much that I'm calm? Why does my peace offend them? Because your stillness used to be submission. Now it's strategy. Your quiet used to mean surrender. Now it means control. You're no longer emotionally available for chaos, and that absence of reaction feels like punishment to people who thrived on your energy. They can't feed on what you don't serve anymore. You've become a new frequency entirely, not high and unreachable, but balanced and self-directed. You no longer live inside the same emotional weather system. Their storms don't reach your forecast. Their moods don't move your sky. And that kind of peace, it unnerves people who only know how to connect through crisis. So let them say, you're hard to read. You are. You're not written for them anymore. Let them say you're distant. You are. You've moved to higher ground where manipulation can't breathe. Let them say you're cold. You're not. You're composed. You're not mean. You're measured. You're not arrogant. You're accurate. Remember this, chosen ones. Unpredictability is your new protection. You're no longer a character in their familiar script. You're the author now, editing the entire narrative in real time. And those who once thought they had you figured out, they're realizing the truth too late. You're not lost. You're just no longer findable in the places they left you. Number 6. You became unrecognizable because your frequency no longer fits inside their comfort zone. You're not being watched. You're being researched, like a mystery they can't solve. They can't decode your silence because it doesn't speak their language anymore. My dear chosen ones, here's what happens when you stop explaining your evolution. The world starts trying to dissect it. You've become their favorite case study, the walking question mark that keeps them up at night. They replay your moves, your posts, your glow, trying to spot the formula. But there isn't one, because what you did wasn't strategy. It was survival turned into strength. You didn't rise through the ranks. You disappeared, recalibrated, and came back with an energy that doesn't fit their categories. And now they're confused, because the person they used to know, the one they could read like a map, no longer exists. You didn't announce your transformation, you embodied it. One day you were still cleaning up the mess of old battles, wondering if you'd ever find peace. The next, you walked in like a calm storm, steady, centered, unreadable. And that's what drives them mad. They can't trace your timeline. They can't find the glitch that explains how you're calm without closure, focused without validation, powerful without position. They're checking your moves like a security feed, whispering, how did they do it? Because in their world, peace always comes with permission. And you didn't ask for any. You broke the invisible rules. You healed quietly, upgraded privately, and came back without seeking applause. You didn't audition for worthiness. You just were. That's the power of the chosen ones. You don't rise by being noticed. You rise by no longer needing to be noticed. And that drives the watchers insane, because in their logic, evolution requires a witness. You, on the other hand, evolved in silence. You outgrew their approval system while they were still waiting for the scoreboard to update. Now they study your stillness like it's suspicious. They analyze your calm, your glow, your disinterest in drama, as if peace must be hiding something. They don't understand that the reason you look so untouchable now is because you finally stopped negotiating your worth in places that never knew its value. You didn't climb their ladder. You built your own floor. You didn't outplay their game. You deleted the app. And maybe you've noticed it, chosen one, the questions disguised as compliments, the sudden curiosity, the subtle envy masked as concern. They can't help but analyze you because you've become evidence that freedom exists without permission slips. You make people question their limitations just by existing outside them. And when someone's identity depends on control, your independence feels like an earthquake. So let them watch. Let them speculate. Let them talk in circles trying to name what can't be defined. Because while they're busy observing your peace, you're already 3 timelines ahead. You don't have to explain your calm to people who've never met theirs. You earned your clarity in the dark, when no one was clapping, when it looked like you wouldn't make it. That's why it can't be copied. It was built, not borrowed. They think they're studying you, but what they're really doing is confronting themselves, their limits, their envy, their fear of what's possible. You are the living proof that reinvention doesn't need recognition. You're not their mystery to solve. You're their reminder that power doesn't need witnesses. Let them analyze your silence all they want. It's still louder than their noise. Number 7, this isn't confidence. It's the calm of someone who finally ended the trial in their own mind. This isn't confidence. It's the calm after the verdict. They tried to make you doubt yourself until you became your own judge and you ruled in your favor. My dear chosen ones, this isn't confidence you're feeling. This is what peace looks like when the trial finally ends. For years you've been cross-examined by opinions that had no authority, judged by people who couldn't even manage their own chaos. They questioned your tone, your choices, your silence, your growth, as if your evolution required their permission slip. Every glance, every rumor, every passive-aggressive word was another accusation tossed into your internal courtroom. And you kept defending yourself, until one day you realized you were standing trial for crimes you never committed. The world trained you to believe that being humble meant staying small, that being kind meant being quiet, that being confident meant being arrogant. They taught you to tone it down so others could feel tall, to apologize for simply existing too fully. But the truth finally hit. You weren't on trial for wrongdoing. You were on trial for refusing to keep performing your weakness. And that's when something inside you snapped, not in rage, but in realization. You fired the jury. You threw out the case. You took back the gavel and said, "Not guilty." Not guilty of carrying other people's projections. Not guilty of making them uncomfortable with your growth. Not guilty of the silence they mistook for peace. Not guilty of surviving in a world that fed on your uncertainty. The verdict came from within, and it wasn't whispered, it thundered. You are cleared, case closed. And now you walk differently. You speak with a steadiness that shakes those who still rely on external approval. They call it arrogance because they've mistaken your composure for ego. But what they're really seeing is someone who no longer needs permission to breathe. Someone who doesn't apologize for knowing their worth. Someone who has learned that peace is louder than defense. You're not trying to convince anyone anymore. You don't explain your healing to people still addicted to their wounds. You don't prove your loyalty to those who only valued your silence. That stillness you carry, it unnerves them, because your calm exposes the chaos they've normalized. Your self-assurance feels like rebellion in a world that profits from self-doubt. And maybe, chosen one, you sometimes wonder, am I coming off too strong, too detached? Number, you're just free. You've stepped out of the courtroom they're still living in. You've stopped negotiating with guilt and finally signed peace with yourself. What they call too much is really the absence of chains. Understand this. People still on trial will always resent those who've been acquitted. They're still chasing validation, still waiting for applause, still asking for a verdict from the crowd. But you're already free. You walked out, closed the doors behind you, and let silence be your statement. So no, this isn't confidence. This is completion. This is what it looks like when someone who's been misread, underestimated, and misunderstood finally reclaims the microphone of their own narrative. You don't need the world to clap. You are the standing ovation. And the next time they whisper, "You've changed," smile, because you have. You're no longer performing for a jury that never mattered. Number 8. You stopped shrinking to fit rooms built for your silence, and the walls are still echoing from your exit. You outgrew rooms that couldn't breathe at your altitude. They called it loyalty when you stayed small, but the moment you stretched, they called it ego. My dear chosen ones, you didn't leave those old spaces. You simply grew too tall for their ceilings. There's a moment in every evolution where you stop fitting in, not because you've become difficult, but because your presence starts exposing how little those rooms ever really held. You know exactly what I'm talking about, the environments where silence was praised, ambition was side-eyed, and authenticity felt like rebellion. The spaces where you learned to shrink yourself just to survive the atmosphere. You became fluent in the art of dimming, not because you lacked light, but because you thought survival depended on staying soft enough to keep others comfortable. But there comes a breaking point. One day, you realize that pretending to be small doesn't protect you. It suffocates you. You wake up and see the invisible contract you've been signing for years. I'll make myself less so you can feel more. That contract expires the moment you remember who you are, because chosen ones were never built to decorate cages. We were built to outgrow them. When you stopped laughing at half-hearted compliments disguised as control, when you stopped saying it's fine to things that drained your spirit, when you stopped apologizing for the size of your vision, that's when they started whispering, "You changed." But no, you didn't change. You stopped donating your energy to systems that only worked when you stayed silent. You stopped dimming your power for people who measured their worth by how much they could minimize yours. Let's be honest, chosen one, you spent years trying to earn belonging in spaces that only tolerated your presence as long as you played by their unspoken rules. Don't be too confident. Don't grow too fast. Don't stand out too much. They called that peace, but it was really obedience, and you mistook it for love because you were taught that acceptance required adjustment. But you were never meant to blend in. You were meant to shift the energy of every room you walk into. So now they're saying you've become distant. They're saying you're acting brand new. What they really mean is, you stopped playing the role we assigned you. They're not angry you evolved. They're angry they no longer benefit from your self-doubt, because your clarity is confrontation to people who feed off confusion. Your self-respect feels like arrogance to those who survive on power imbalance. But the truth is, you didn't cut anyone off. They just can't reach you where you've risen. And maybe you wonder sometimes, did I do the right thing? Was I too harsh? You were honest. You finally honored the version of yourself that refused to live half-lit. There's nothing cruel about walking away from spaces that punish you for shining. You didn't abandon anyone. You simply stopped crawling to stay in places built for your old self. Remember this, chosen ones, your growth will always sound like rebellion to those who profit from your silence. But you were never meant to be a background character in someone else's comfort zone. You were meant to take up space, break ceilings, and show the world what happens when authenticity stops asking for approval. You're not shrinking anymore, and that right there is the loudest revolution you'll ever lead. 9. The old you they miss was never real. It was a survival costume stitched from fear and approval. The old you they miss was never real. It was a survival script you outgrew. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that kept their comfort safe from your truth. My dear chosen ones, let's strip this illusion bare. When people say, "I miss the old you," what they're really confessing is, "I miss when your boundaries benefited me." They're not grieving your presence. They're grieving their power. That old you wasn't a personality. It was a program coded in fear, designed to keep peace at the cost of your sanity. You didn't choose to be agreeable, quiet, or endlessly patient. You were trained to be, conditioned to monitor the emotional temperature of every room like a human thermostat. You became fluent in survival, reading micro-expressions, predicting reactions, and suppressing your own voice just to avoid the storm. What they called sweet was you editing yourself in real time to make everyone else feel safe. What they called chill was you swallowing your truth so no one's insecurity would flare up. What they called understanding was you performing emotional CPR for people who never once learned how to breathe on their own. That version of you wasn't love. It was labor, invisible, exhausting labor. And they adored it because it required nothing of them except your silence. But something in you snapped, not out of rage, but realization. You started noticing how every thank you came wrapped in entitlement, how every "you're so easy to talk to" really meant "you never challenge me." You started noticing the weight of your own compliance. And then one day, you stopped carrying it. You stopped laughing at things that weren't funny. You stopped apologizing for being unavailable. You stopped volunteering for emotional jobs you were never hired for. Now, the same people who drained you are spinning stories about how you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, defensive, or selfish. They'll act like you betrayed them when all you really did was retire from roles you never auditioned for. They're not mourning the loss of you. They're mourning the loss of their emotional control panel. The buttons don't work anymore. The guilt trips don't land. The manipulation doesn't stick. You stopped being programmable. And maybe a part of you feels guilty because conditioning runs deep. You might catch yourself wondering, was I too harsh? Too cold? No, chosen one. You were too honest for people who built their comfort on your compliance. You didn't turn cold, you just stopped setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. You didn't become distant, you became whole. Let's tell the truth. What they miss isn't the old you. They miss how well you disappeared inside yourself for their convenience. They miss how predictable you were, how easily you folded, how quickly you said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. But you're not available for that anymore. That wasn't peace. That was performance. That wasn't harmony. That was self-erasure with good manners. And the most powerful part, you don't owe anyone a eulogy for the person you outgrew. The old you didn't die. It just stopped pretending. You returned to your natural state, honest, calm, unbothered, and untamed. So when they say, "You've changed," smile quietly. Chosen one. They're just realizing they can't reach you through the same old doors anymore. The code has changed, the script is deleted, and the performance is officially over. Number 10. You're now operating on an upgrade they can't decode, and that terrifies every system that depended on your doubt. You're now operating on a code they'll never crack. They can't read your moves anymore because you stopped playing on their network. My dear chosen ones, this is the chapter where everything about you starts to confuse them. You're no longer reacting, explaining, or proving. You're just moving, smooth, unbothered, untraceable. And to the outside world, that looks strange. They whisper, "You're acting different," because they can't figure out your pattern anymore. But the truth is, there's no pattern left to study. You've upgraded the entire software of your being, and they're still trying to log in with an outdated password. You see, the old you ran on external approval, the constant need to be liked, accepted, understood. You used to overthink every word, every silence, every decision, but not anymore. You stopped running your life on public opinion. You stopped outsourcing your peace. You stopped living on other people's timelines, and when you did that, you became unreadable. You became a new operating system entirely, one built on clarity, self-respect, and precision. Now they call you unpredictable. But you're not unpredictable. You're simply unprogrammed. You're no longer moving on the emotional codes that kept you looping: guilt, shame, people-pleasing, fear of being misunderstood. You deleted those files permanently. You no longer respond to manipulation disguised as concern. You no longer chase closure in conversations designed to drain you. You no longer ask for permission to move differently. You just move. And that motion alone is shaking the entire matrix that once held you. And here's the part they'll never admit. They're frustrated not because they've lost you, but because they've lost access to you. They used to reach you through guilt, through obligation, through old emotional shortcuts they built over the years. But now those roads are closed, permanently rerouted to self-respect. They're sending signals to the old frequency, wondering why it's quiet, not realizing you don't live there anymore. You didn't disappear, you just leveled up beyond their reach. Sometimes they'll say, "You've changed," but what they really mean is, "We can't track you anymore." And that's the whole point. You weren't meant to stay downloadable to people who never updated themselves. You're now encrypted with boundaries, coded with peace, and synced with precision. You're not cold, you're clear. You're not detached, you're recalibrated. You're operating on bandwidth they can't even detect because you finally stopped broadcasting your every move. And maybe, chosen one, you've started to notice how quiet it's become, how still your world feels now that the noise doesn't reach you. That's not isolation, that's optimization. You're not lost in the silence. You've simply entered a level of awareness where chaos can't follow. The old crowd can't find you because their signals don't match your frequency anymore. You used to move on reaction, now you move on intention. You used to run on emotion, now you run on data from your own intuition. So let them wonder where you went. Let them scan for you in rooms you no longer enter. You don't owe them an explanation for becoming untraceable. You didn't ghost anyone, you outgrew their access. You're not strange, you're upgraded. And the beauty of this new timeline is that only those who've done their own inner rewiring can even recognize your signal. Everyone else? They'll keep calling it change. But you know better. You're not acting different, you're just finally running the newest version of yourself. And they'll never have the password. Number 11. Your peace feels dangerous to people who can only breathe inside chaos. Your calm feels like an earthquake to people who feed on chaos. They mistake your silence for distance because they've never met someone who can destroy confusion without raising their voice. My dear chosen ones, let's call this what it really is. Your peace has become their panic. You've entered a new timeline where quiet is not weakness, it's strategy. And the moment you stopped reacting, the noise merchants started trembling. They were never addicted to you. They were addicted to the chaos you used to carry. When you finally dropped the urge to explain yourself, defend yourself, or fix what was never yours to repair, the silence that followed became deafening to them. Because peace, to the unhealed, sounds like punishment. They used to pull you into endless emotional boxing matches, guilt trips disguised as concern, arguments framed as just talking. They'd provoke, you'd respond, and the cycle would keep spinning. That's how they felt alive, through your reaction. You were their mirror, their therapist, their proof that they still mattered. But now you're unavailable for drama that has no destination. You've cut off the supply line to dysfunction, and they're going through withdrawals. You see, chosen one, your peace isn't passive. It's a declaration. It's the moment you realize that not everything broken wants to be fixed, and not every storm deserves a forecast. You stopped being a volunteer firefighter in relationships that kept lighting their own fires. You no longer attend every argument you're invited to, because not every battle is meant to be fought. Some are meant to be walked away from in silence. And that silence, that's what terrifies them. Because in your stillness, they can no longer find themselves. Your calm doesn't give them the rush of control, the thrill of reaction, the satisfaction of chaos. You've removed the emotional fuel that kept their dysfunction alive. They can't provoke what's at peace with itself. They can't manipulate what doesn't respond to fear. You've become unpredictable, and to people who survive off emotional turbulence, unpredictability feels like danger. And maybe you've felt the tension, the comments that sound half joking, the "you're so distant now" remarks. But don't second guess it. What you're protecting is priceless. You're not disconnected. You're disciplined. You're not distant. You're deliberate. You've finally realized that your peace isn't up for public negotiation. Remember this: those who thrive in chaos will always accuse calm souls of being too much or too cold. But that's only because your steadiness exposes their storm. They can't comprehend that silence can be strength, that calm can be the loudest form of self-respect. You're not ignoring them, you're ignoring dysfunction's invitation to perform. So let them talk, let them invent stories about why you're quiet now. You don't owe them noise. Your peace is not a performance, it's proof that you've exited the battlefield. You no longer swing at shadows just to prove your heart's still beating. You've learned that the loudest statement is peace that doesn't flinch when chaos tries to make eye contact. My chosen ones, your calm isn't exile, it's evolution. You've stopped feeding the fire, and now they're cold without you. And that, right there, is the power of your new authority. And that, my dear chosen ones, is the shift everyone's whispering about. Not arrogance, not distance, but evolution. You've stepped into a new timeline where calm is your armor and clarity is your compass. The noise around you isn't proof you're wrong, it's proof you've leveled up. Let them speculate, let them talk, because while they're still debating who you've become, you're already becoming more. If this message hit home, if you've felt the sting of being misunderstood for your peace, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button so this energy keeps moving. Subscribe if you know you're done playing small and ready to walk in your new authority. And drop the number 77 in the comments if you're claiming your peace as power from this moment forward. Share this with another chosen one who's been called different lately, so they remember it's not rejection, it's redirection. This is your confirmation. You didn't change, you just stopped asking for permission to be whole. Stay grounded, stay unbothered, and keep walking in your new frequency. The world's still catching up.